I'll fix my hair.
Oh, you got stuff in there. Oh, you got product.
Welcome to Burnley and Pendle Faith Centre for the third event for Christian Muslim Encounters. Today we're hosting, and it's a real privilege to be hosting Dr John Morrow, who will be speaking about the covenant of the Prophet ﷺ with the Christians of the world. It's a very exciting event. I'm really looking forward to it.
We'll start off with housekeeping. There's no fire alarm planned for this evening, so if you do hear the alarm, the fire doors are just through there, and just follow me through them doors, and we'll gather at the front on the atrium outside where you came in. With regards to toilets, ladies' toilets are just through there, and there's ablution facilities for ladies and gents through on the corridor there. But gents' toilets are around the outside at the back at the rear of the cafe. Okay. Just to give you a sort of background on Burnley and Pendle Faith Centre and why it's here. A lot of you will be aware that we had disturbances in 2001, which the town was rocked by. And in the aftermath of that, one of the things that happened for the first time in Burnley, if there were issues within local communities, a parish priest couldn't just pick up the phone and ring a local imam or a local community leader and just say, we've got issues in our community, can we sit together, can we come together and have a chat, have a discussion? So one of the things that happened in the aftermath of that, which Bishop John led on, was bringing together the local clergy, so the local imams and the local, the local clergy were brought together to have these discussions and have these conversations. And as a result of that, Building Bridges Burnley was born. And they started to work together on having dialogue, interfaith dialogue and discussions about various community issues. And one of the things that then happened was, obviously Burnley was in the limelight, and what ended up happening was Burnley was offered Building Schools for the Future money to build and sort of provide Burnley with first-class education, new buildings right across the whole of Burnley and Pendle. And as a result of that, Building Bridges Burnley got involved in the process because they felt, speaking to Lancaster County Council, that faith played a major part in the lives of the people of Burnley. So they started to get involved in that conversation. And as a result of that, the idea of a faith centre for Burnley was born. And it went one step further, where we ended up having not only a faith centre here that worked on Burnley campus, which is quite unique in itself, but it also meant that all of the local schools that were built, so there's 6 secondary schools, high schools that were built in Burnley, Burnley and Pendle after that, all have a faith room or a small faith centre within them, and they work as a satellite centre that feeds into this one. So part of my role, as well as working with local communities, is also to work with all of those local schools to promote interfaith dialogue. And it keeps it. One thing that I find is that it's a unique job in the sense of this is the only faith centre in the country that works with schools that also have satellite centres, but it's also unique in the sense that no one day of my job is ever the same, so I'm doing lots and lots of different things all the time. And the uniqueness of this place, this space that you see, one day it's used by young people taking part in arts activities, another day it might be used for a conference, another day it's used for events like this. But it's used by all communities. So for example, we used to have on a Wednesday night, we'd have the Buddhist community coming in here and doing Buddhist meditation. We have a Sufi group coming in on a Thursday night. We have Christian prayers on a Thursday. We have the Friday congregational prayer on a Friday. One of the things that I've noticed is that nobody will come in here and nobody says that I'm not going in there because a Christian prays in there or because a Muslim prays in there. Nobody has ownership, but it belongs to everybody. And I think that's the uniqueness and the beauty of this place. And it's here for everybody to use, and it's well used by all of our local communities. So I'm going to be quiet now and hand you over to our distinguished guest and introduce Brother Abdurrahman from the Radical Middle Way. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. My name is Abdurrahman Malik. I'm programs manager with an organization called the Radical Middle Way. For the last 8.5 years, we've been involved in reaching out to communities across the United Kingdom and working with local partners to bring scholars, activists, artists, individuals like John Andrew Morrow and create spaces where we can have dialogue and engage with one another on difficult issues through the lens of faith. And it's a real pleasure for us to complete this European tour that John has been on here in Burnley. And this space is such a beautiful space and has such a beautiful vibe to it. The moment you walk in, you feel that this is a space where people come together, and there's a lot of blessing. So thank you very much for having us. Thank you very much to Ali and to Anderson from the Christian Muslim Encounters, which is a project that's come out of the University of Lancaster, for hosting us today. Just a few words, I think, on some reflections on how the last few days have gone, because you, in a way, are the special audience who's going to engage with this after John has been to The Hague and to Amsterdam, to Brussels, to Paris, and to Cardiff, and to London, to Cambridge, to Oxford, and now we're here in the north of England. I came across John's work, The Covenants of the Prophet, with the Christians of the world late last year. It was introduced to me by a fellow journalist and friend of mine in Canada. And I remember being exposed to it and thinking, this is really unusual, because I really haven't heard of this before. And I've been a Muslim all my life and thinking I'm relatively well informed and well engaged, which I'm proven wrong constantly about. I thought to myself, well, why haven't I heard of this before? And maybe this is one of those Da Vinci Code style Muslim explorations. But the more I read about the covenants of the Prophet with the Christians of the world, the more I engaged with John's work, the more I was convinced, and the more we were convinced at RMW, that this was something that needed to be spoken about, talked about, explored, challenged, engaged with, and encountered. It's been a real pleasure to get to know John over the last few months, or as I learned well along the planning process, re-get to know him, because we knew one another as teenagers in Toronto and then hadn't seen each other for most of the last 20 years. To the point that I didn't know he was a professor and a distinguished author of 12 books. It's been wonderful to get to know John again. John was born in 1971 in Montreal, Canada. John comes from a very unique cultural heritage. He's part Aboriginal, belonging to the Métis Nation, which is a very specifically Canadian Aboriginal group, which is a mix of French, English, and Aboriginal nations. He speaks Spanish and French and English, of course. Spent much of his life in Toronto. He's a graduate of the University of Toronto, where he earned his doctoral degree in Spanish literature. But his interests have expanded much beyond that. He's the author of 12 books, mostly on Islamic studies, looking at Arabic language, Islamic symbolism, also looking at contemporary Islamic issues and spirituality. His latest book, of course, published last year, is The Covenants of the Prophet with the Christians of the World. I think you're in for a treat tonight. I think you're in for something very, very exciting, and I hope that as you're listening to John's presentation and going through this incredible Indiana Jones-style story of rediscovering these scrolls, which John calls the scrolls of hope, and I like that idea. I see a movie in the future. We'll have to get him a bullwhip and a better hat than mine. That as you go through this story with him, that you're thinking of questions and also reactions, because I think in the discussion that'll follow, it'll be an opportunity for us to really reflect on what these covenants mean and what they could possibly mean for our communities. I'm now going to hand it over to someone I think most of you know very well. Bishop Geoff Pearson is the Bishop of Lancaster. As everyone who I spoke to about Bishop Geoff before I came has said, that you are an incredible supporter of this community, of interfaith, of building bridges, and of creating opportunities like this for genuine dialogue. And so it's a great honor for us to be working with you tonight and to share the stage with you. So I'm going to hand it over to him, and he's going to take you forward. Thank you.
Well done for setting aside World Cup and Wimbledon and all the other things that are going on at the moment. And some of the things have just been said that were very much on my mind, Indiana Jones and discovering all sorts of exciting things. If I could just kind of put it into Islam is often seen as antagonistic towards other belief systems. I did just note down a few headlines from, and this is not just the popular press. Young people joining Muslim insurgents in Syria and Iraq. ISIS sends children aged 12 to suicide. A Christian woman sentenced to be whipped and hanged in Sudan. Mass fighters of ISIS. Radicalization. What I felt was so exciting about his book, Professor Morrow's book, was actually showing a completely different face of Islam that is not reflected in any way in those headlines. And I'm fascinated with the evidence, and fascinated how other people react to the evidence. And it seems to me here there is, I guess a lot of you are here tonight thinking how various different communities, for example, Muslim Christian communities, can unite together. And maybe there's another important building block that we might discover in the work that Professor Morrow's doing. So I'm so grateful that for what he's done. I'm amazed at his sort of language skills and some of the work that he's done. So I'm really looking forward to this, and there'll be plenty of opportunities for questions and response to this important work. So thank you, Professor. Over to you.
And so I have to thank Brother Abdurrahman Malik and everyone at Radical Middle Way, and everyone who was involved in organizing this tour and this event. May God bless you all. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, fellow believers, today is an auspicious occasion. Perhaps you are familiar with the Quran. Yes. Perhaps you are familiar with the Sunnah. Yes. But how many of you have heard of the letters, treaties, and covenants of the Prophet Muhammad? Few of us. So, I grew up as a Muslim, and I was astonished when I discovered this repository of letters, covenants, and treaties that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, had produced. I found a little book in English called The Letters of the Prophets, and then I found some books in French dealing on the topic, and finally I found an Arabic source. There's a scholar, his name is Muhammad Hamidullah from India, and he was the Imam in Paris, and then he moved to the United States. Great scholar. He was a muhaddith. And he compiled all of these letters into a book called Watha'iq. Okay? It's an Arabic book about this big. And in there are over 300 of these letters from the Prophet. And it provides an enormous amount of insight, right? Because you're hearing the words of the Messenger of Allah directly from him. And you're not just hearing things that are related to Muslims and the Muslim community and Aqidah and fiqh matters and so on. No. You see how he interacted with people of other religions. So yes, we should have the Quran, and we should have the Sunnah, the books of Hadith that we follow, but we definitely should have these treaties, letters, and covenants up there. Okay? Critically important. Today I'm here to speak to you about the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon him. The Prophet Muhammad granted charters of protection, okay, covenants of protection, right, treaties providing rights and liberties to over half a dozen Christian communities. He also granted similar protections to Jewish communities and to the Sabians and so on. But I am just teasing you right now. In order to tell you this story, we have to go back to the very beginning. I really need to contextualize all of this. So I've told you about these covenants. Today we're going to be dealing specifically with one. But we will go back to the beginning so I can really put everything into context. We begin with very basic things. This here is the planet Earth. Yes? Excellent. The Earth is not flat. You see, you've already learned something. You didn't come here in vain. Okay. So this here is the Sinai Peninsula. Okay? So you have the Sinai Peninsula there. This is in Egypt. Okay? And then up to the north, you would have Palestine and Israel and Lebanon and everything. And to the right there, you have Saudi Arabia. So I just want to locate you physically. And speaking of locating you physically, here's the physical geography of the Sinai Peninsula. And if you look at this and you imagine a caravan, okay, you can figure out where they would go. Okay? And the Sinai Peninsula is up there, over there. The monastery of St. Catherine. This here is a political map of Egypt, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, when I say the Sinai, you associate this with someone very famous. Charlton Heston, of course. No, I'm so sorry. I mean Moses. Moshe, Musa, peace be upon him. The Sinai is also associated with the prophet Elijah, who is known in Arabic as Ilyas. Okay? Intimately connected to this region, and strangely, oddly, surprisingly, it is also connected to Muhammad. Oops, wrong Muhammad. This one here is Muhammad Ali. I once had a student in a class I gave on Islamic culture and civilization, and when in the exam said, who founded the Islamic faith? And he put Muhammad Ali. An incredible accomplishment for an African-American boxer who now has about 2 billion followers. But seriously, here is Muhammad. Haha, we thought I'd show you a cartoon. No, we're not in the Netherlands here. The Sinai Peninsula is also associated with St. Catherine. Now, she is a saint. She is a holy woman. Why? Because she was martyred. How come? Because she became Christian. And then something miraculous happened, according to Christian tradition. Angels picked up her body from Alexandria and carried her body all the way to the peak of a mountain in the Sinai, on the top of a mountain that is known as the Mountain of Catherine, Jabal Katrina. And it remained there for a long time. And eventually the monks went and they took her body and brought it into the monastery where it rests to this day. And remarkably well conserved when we consider the length of time. The Sinai is famous for this, the monastery of St. Catherine, okay, at the foot of Mount Sinai. Now, what on earth does this have to do with Muhammad? And when I say Muhammad, I do not mean any disrespect, because I'm referring to the period of time before he proclaimed his prophecy. So I'm talking about Muhammad as a young man. Here we have the trade routes, okay? So we know that Muhammad and his uncle and his wife Khadija, they were business people. They used to operate caravans, okay? Now some of us have heard the story that when the prophet was 15, he made a journey to Syria, where he had an encounter with Bahira, the monk. And then we know there was another caravan to Syria just before he married Khadija al-Kubra. Okay? However, it would be highly unusual, okay, for someone in that business to make 2 trips. These are simply 2 famous trips. According to many ancient Islamic sources, and also ancient Christian sources, Muhammad was actually very well traveled. Okay? And where did he go? According to our sources, Muslim sources, ancient Islamic sources in Arabic, he traveled all the way to the Yemen. He traveled, of course, up into Syria, into what is now Iraq, as far as Persia. And he also made it as far as Oman, where there is a very famous market, where he probably came into contact with people from India, because they used to go there to trade. He went to Egypt, and it's also related that he may have made it all the way to Abyssinia. because that's what he did as a young man, and that's the type of business that his wife was in, leading these caravans. Okay, so when he was in Syria, in a town called Bosra, okay, Bosra, he had an encounter with Bahira the monk. And we imagine that he was living in a cave or something in the middle of the desert, but actually, the house of Bahira still exists to this day and has been preserved. So now you can associate an image with what you read in the Sirah literature. So this is where Bahira the monk used to live, according to the accounts that have reached us. Okay? Because the word in Arabic that is used means a tower. It's Salma'a, I believe, the word. So it is a tower. It is not a cave. So monks and hermits used to live in like these tower-type structures. This is the inside of the hermit's tower in which he lived. The cathedral, okay, where he used to officiate outside of the cathedral. So you can associate that hadith with these images. The people of this town have even preserved, right, the footprints of the camel upon which he was riding. So this is the actual spot where he disembarked from the camel. This is where Bahira the monk, had this conversation with his uncle and asked to see his back, and he saw the seal of prophecy. Okay? This is where it took place, according to the accounts that have been passed down. Something very similar occurred in the Sinai. All right? So, you remember this story about Bahira, and what was unusual as he was riding overhead, there was a cloud that was following him overhead, protecting him from the sun. Okay? It's something natural, but unusual, right? And so, people could perceive the spiritual significance of that. Well, according to the monks from the monastery of St. Catherine, the Sinai fathers knew Muhammad personally. How come? He used to lead caravans. So he used to supply them. And so they were in regular contact with him. He was a caravaneer for the monks. Okay? All right. Well, if he was leading caravans to Syria and meeting monks there, it is not unusual that he would have met monks elsewhere. Okay? That was his job. What did he do there? Was it simply commerce? Not according to the monks, and not according to the Arabs who live in that region. According to both the monks and both the Arabs, Muhammad used to pray and meditate and fast in this cave at the top of Mount Sinai. What is the significance of this cave? This is the cave in which Moses spent those 40 nights when he went on the top of Mount Sinai in order to be in communion with the divine. And so, it is as if he was following in the footsteps of Moses, as if he was there not only for purposes of commerce, but purposes of ziyarah, right? Spiritual pilgrimage. Following in the footsteps of one of the leaders of the monotheistic tradition. One day, however, when he was resting in the front of the monastery, an eagle appeared. And that eagle started to circle around his head. And a monk noticed this and said, gee, this is highly unusual. I will inform the abbot. He brushes and he tells the abbot, you gotta see this. The abbot comes out and he looks and he sees this eagle circling over this young man. And he says, this is a sign from God. And so he invites Muhammad into the monastery. treats him with a great deal of hospitality, and sits him down and says, Muhammad, I see a great future in you. I believe that you will become a powerful leader. So I would like you to protect us. Muhammad said, seriously? How can I protect you? Right? I'm poor, I'm an orphan, I have no wealth. And he says, no, this is a sign from God. Because the eagle is a messenger of God. The eagle represents the angel Gabriel in certain spiritual traditions. And so he said, fine, I will protect your monastery. And when the time came to sign the document, he said, well, I can't sign, I can't write. And so they brought him a bowl of ink. He dips his hands in the ink, and he signs it with his palm print. Then he goes back to Medina, and according to the monks, he comes in, and then he goes back to Mecca, and according to the monks, he comes into wealth. He married Khadija, and a couple of decades later, they hear that there's this new ruler, right? He has received revelation. He has set up a state in Medina, and it's starting to grow and spread. So, the chronicles of these monks, and monks keep chronicles for centuries. Some of them go back thousands of years. It rained a lot this summer. There was a drought. We had a visitor from Cairo, right? Things like this. And what does the chronicle say? In the second year of the Hijrah, we sent a delegation of monks to Medina, where they met with the Prophet Muhammad, who granted them a charter of rights and freedom. So this is evidence from the Christian record that Muhammad was indeed a historical character. I mean, they published these, provocative books suggesting that he never existed, just like they do with Jesus. He never existed, despite the abundance of evidence. And so he signed. So they told him, listen, you remember, you made us this promise of protection. And he said, of course, and I have every intention of honoring it. And so he wrote up what is known as the Covenant of the Prophet Muhammad with the monks of Mount Sinai, and he signed it with his palm prints. Now, what does this document say? I will read. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. This covenant was written by Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, the proclaimer and warner, Bashiran wa Nadiran, trusted to protect Allah's creation, in order that people may raise no claim against Allah after the advent of His messengers, for Allah is almighty, wise. He has written it for the members of His religion, and to all those who profess the Christian religion in East and West, near or far, Arabs or non-Arabs, known or unknown, as a covenant of protection. If anyone breaks the covenant herein proclaimed, or contravenes or transgresses its commands, he has broken the covenant of Allah, breaks his bonds, makes a mockery of his religion, deserves the curse of Allah, whether he is a sultan or another among the believing Muslims. If a monk or pilgrim seeks protection in mountain or valley, in a cave or tilled fields, in the plain, in the desert, or in a church, I am behind them, defending them from every enemy. I, my helpers, all the members of my religion, and all my followers, for they, the monks and the pilgrims, are my proteges and my subjects. I protect them from the interference with their supplies, and from the payment of taxes, save what they willingly renounce. There shall be no compulsion or constraint against them in any of these matters. A bishop shall not be removed from his bishopric, nor a monk from his monastery, nor a hermit from his tower, nor shall a pilgrim be hindered from his pilgrimage. Moreover, no building from among their churches shall be destroyed. Neither poll tax nor fees shall be laid on monks, bishops, or worshippers, for I protect them wherever they may be, on land or sea, in east and west, in north and south, They are under my protection, within my covenant, and under my security against all harm. Those who also isolate themselves in the mountains or in sacred sites shall be free from the poll tax, land tribute, and from tithe or duty on whatever they grow for their own use. And they shall be assisted in raising a crop for their personal use. They shall not be obliged to serve in war or to pay the poll tax, even those for whom an obligation to pay land tribute exists, or who possess resources in land or from commercial activity. They shall not have to pay more than 12 dirhams a head per year. On no one shall an unjust tax be imposed, and with the people of the book there is to be no strife, and let it be over what is for the good. We wish to take them under the wing of our mercy, and the penalty of vexation shall be kept at a distance from them, wherever they are and wherever they may settle. If a Christian woman enters a Muslim household, she shall be received with kindness, and she shall be given the opportunity to pray in her church. There shall be no dispute between her and a man who loves her religion. Whoever contravenes the covenant of Allah and acts to the contrary is a rebel against his covenant and his messenger. These people shall be assisted in the maintenance of their religious buildings and their dwellings. Thus they will be aided in their faith and kept true to their allegiance. None of them shall be compelled to bear arms, but the Muslims shall defend them, and they shall never contravene this promise of protection until the hour comes and the world ends. As witness to this covenant, which was written by Muhammad, son of Abdullah, the messenger of Allah, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, to all the Christians, as surety for the fulfillment of all that is prescribed herein, the following persons set their hands. Witnessed by 22 companions of the Prophet. May Allah be pleased with them. This covenant was written in his own hand by Ali ibn Abi Talib in the mosque of the Prophet. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, on the 3rd of Muhammd in the 2nd year of the Prophet's Hijrah. Usually I provide an exegesis, commentary, analysis, but I think it's perfectly and lucidly clear. What do we have here? We have a painting of the monastery of St. Catherine. And what do we see? An encounter between Muslims and Christians. But what is unusual in this picture? Not sure if you can see it clearly, but over here, there is a minaret. There is a mosque at the heart of this monastery. The monastery of St. Catherine is a site holy to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. It is the symbol of peace, harmony, coexistence. Hence, it's considered a World Heritage Site. There are all kinds of holy sites associated with this place. Here's a view of the monastery. These walls were built by Sultan Selim, Ottoman leader, in order to protect the monks from thieves, robbers, highwaymen, and so on. So, Muslim leader protecting Christian. Sultan Selim, Ottoman leader, in order to protect the monks from thieves, robbers, highwaymen, and so on. So, Muslim leader protecting Christian. There you can see the church tower and the mosque. Okay? So for 1400 years, you would hear the bells ringing, calling Christians to prayer, the muezzin calling the adhan, right? Calling Muslims to come pray. Christians and Muslims praying to the one God, side by side, in peace and harmony. Here is an old picture of Mount Sinai. So now when you read about that in the Old Testament or in the Quran, this is the place. This is the top of Mount Sinai, the holy mountain, right? Tur, as it is known in Arabic, Jabal Tur. the mountain. The view from the top. This is the actual peak. It's a long, strenuous journey, very hot. Fortunately, the local Arabs are already up there, ready to sell you cold water. They're Arabs after all, business, business, you know how we Muslims are? Yes. This is the Chapel of the Holy Trinity. Okay. Built on the spot where Moses received the revelation. MashaAllah. This here is a footprint attributed to Harun alayhi salam, Aaron, the brother of Moses, which has been venerated by the people who have lived in that region for over 1,000 years. This is the spot where God spoke to the prophet Elijah, or Elias, peace be upon him. This is the spot where Elijah was fleeing from a tyrannical leader, Jezebel, I believe. This is the Gate of Repentance. If you're familiar with the account from the biblical narrative, this is the Gate of Repentance. This is the Chapel of the 40 Martyrs. And what is this? Another masjid. Where? At the top of Mount Sinai. So in the monastery, there is a masjid. It's called the Juma Masjid because that's where the local Muslims would go to do the Friday prayers. There is also a mosque at the top. It's called Masjid Fatima, the Mosque of Fatima. Here is the inside of that famous mosque. And it is built on top of what? The cave where Muhammd, as a young man, used to pray and meditate. And it has been revered as a holy and sacred site by the people of that region until today. This is a print, okay? It's in the rock. And according to the Jabaliya Arabs of the region, this is a print of Burak, right? This mystical beast that carried the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, from Mecca all the way to the top of Mount Sinai. Okay, this is mentioned in the Quran, and you can check the tafsir, and you can check the hadith literature about this voyage. Okay, many, many sources describe this, that he did indeed go to the Sinai. He went to Damascus and he went to Jerusalem, Al-Quds, right? And so, physical evidence of the Isra and Miraj, the ascent into heaven. This is the Well of Moses. The Well of Moses once again, and what is this? It is a calf carved into stone. Interesting. I don't know if you can see it clearly. It's got the eye, it's got the head, it's got the legs, the hindquarters, and so on. It looks very much like a cat. If you get a high resolution, colored photo, it's very obvious. If you're there in person, it's quite evident. Theory number one: this is the actual calf that was worshipped by the Jews when Moses went up the mountain and they returned to polytheism. It's possible that they carved it out of stone, they melted the gold, and they painted it on, and it was gold-plated. Some people say, no, they say they melted it down. Maybe it simply marks the spot where this event took place. Frankly, it's immaterial one way or another. According to the people who have always lived there, that's where it happened. This here is a massive boulder, and there are 12 holes in it from which water used to sprout. So, according to the people from there, this is where Moses provided water for the 12 tribes of Israel. And what is this? The bush, right? This thing grows and grows and grows and grows. It's a gardener's nightmare. You know, the monks, they want to pray and meditate. They have to bake bread, right? They bake tons of bread every day, every day, every day, every day. Why? Because, this is really incredible, this is like an understanding that they had with the Prophet Muhammad, that the monks would provide bread to the local Bedouins. And for 1400 years, the local Bedouins go to this monastery every day to receive this free bread from the monks. Okay? Because they had made a promise to the Prophet Muhammad that they would help feed these local tribes. So they've honored their promise for 1400 years. Eventually, they got so frustrated pruning this thing that one monk got upset, doused it with gasoline, and tossed a match. And I asked him, what happened? He said, it burned. It is the burning bush after all. Here is a close-up of that church tower and minaret. Another image, older image. This here is a rare photo of the inside of that mosque. And what do they guard? What do they display in the lobby of this monastery? Their most sacred possession, okay? Their most priceless relic, a copy of the Covenant of the Prophet Muhammad with the monks of Mount Sinai, which they want every pilgrim or visitor to see. And, fortunately, I have brought you a copy over there. Now this copy is displayed because it is the most beautiful. It's a copy from 1638. It's not the original. It's a certified copy of the original given by the Sultan. So this is a Turkish translation. We have one over here, which may be from 1517. So when the Sultan Selim conquered Egypt, see, he used to collect relics and historical artifacts, right, that had a religious significance. And he would, so he collected the swords of the Prophet and the companions, their clothing, things belonging to the Prophet's households. We have some early Quranic verses, some of the first revelations written on leather by the scribes of Revelation. You read all this nonsense, oh, the Quran was compiled 30 years after in the time of Uthman, it wasn't written, it's not true, okay? We have surahs of the Quran, handwritten, okay? Sometimes on paper, but most often on leather. They've been dated, they date back exactly to that period of time. So, we have all kinds of ancient copies of Quranic chapters. So, perhaps I could tell you a word or two about how I obtained that document. In 1990, when I started my studies at the University of Toronto, I took a course on philosophy of religion. I proposed to my professor that I would write an essay on jihad, and did a lot of research. I thought I did a good job. It was like 20 pages long, and he had only asked for 5. I really did a lot of research, lots of. And so I submitted, and I get it back, and he gave me like 23%. I was a humble kid, and I said, well, perhaps I deserve it, and maybe I can improve. In that paper, I had cited this Covenant of the Prophet. I had found a translation of it in English dating from, I think, the 1800s. And so, I just left that essay there in a box, and the years passed, and the decades passed, and in 2010 I said, hey, this is not so bad. Maybe I'll submit it for publication. Believe it or not, the first essay I ever wrote, was accepted. It passed the peer review process. And I said, that professor, I don't think he liked Muslims very much. Yes, so scholars and specialists, agreed that it was a contribution to scholarship and published it. And then I said, maybe I should really expand upon this topic. And so I continued doing research, and turned 20 pages became 30, 40, 50, and I wanted the original source. I didn't want an English translation, I wanted the original Arabic. So that's when this quest for the covenants begins. So I was doing research, and then, I found a source that said that this Actinami was published in Paris in 16. So I obtained a copy of that document in Arabic, and I compared it, and it was different. And I learned that that was actually a covenant made with the Christians of the Levant that was discovered by a monk in a monastery close to Mount Carmel in the early 1600s, and which had been brought back to France. So it was a covenant that virtually no one had heard of. And so I kept looking to try to trace the original, and then I found another covenant that was, from the 1500s, and it was a covenant that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, had made with the Christians of Egypt. So this one may have been ignored, and others, forgotten, but I found one that was completely and totally unknown. So I find a picture of this covenant, of course, in a book, and the quality was very poor. There's a picture of it on Wikipedia. Poor resolution. Anyhow, and in some books. So I contact the person, the publisher that published this book, and I say, can you get me a better copy of this? And usually you pay them a small fee, and they'll give you permission to use it. And she said, well, I don't own the copyright. Father Justin does. And I said, okay. So I email Father Justin. I say, can I publish this picture? And he says, nah, that one's already been published. I have a better one for you. And I said, okay, great. Can I get a copy? He says, yeah. Just let me go downstairs. Now, his English was flawless. So I figured I was just talking to some American guy. And then, a few minutes later, I get this email with this attachment, and he had sent me a copy of this covenant. It was then that I realized that I had been corresponding with Father Justin of Sinai. This gentleman, okay? So I thought it was some guy from the States or something, a parish priest, but it's the famous Father Justin of Sinai, who's in charge of, one of the most valuable collection of ancient manuscripts. This is the greatest collection of Christian manuscripts in the world. And they have ancient Islamic manuscripts and so on, many, many different languages. And so he gave this to me, and I was wow. And he mentioned to me, they have a copy at Mount Athos in Greece. And I said, wow, incredible. I had seen a little picture of it once in a book published in the 70s, And I said, you think I could get a copy? And he says, well, those people, they keep to themselves. They don't even talk to us. We're all Greek Orthodox, but the door is closed. So I'm invited to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. to give a lecture on the covenants of the prophet. And so I decided to poke fun at the monks. And I said that, compared to Mount Athos, Harvard University is like an open admissions community college. Right? Little diss there. By the time I got home, to Indiana, first thing you do, you get home, you check your email. There was an email from a monk named Cosmas. And he told me, I hear you're looking for something. And he attached a copy of the covenant that is at the back there. The really long, beautiful one, full of color. And I was just like, wow. And then, as an extra bonus, he gave me the other one that's right next to it. Now these are all different copies of the same covenant. So this one is from the monastery of St. Catherine, dates from 1638. This one from St. Catherine, it's 1517. Those ones have been dated, they date back to the 16th century. And the one over there to the right in the 1800s. They're all identical, they're all the same. They're all certified in the 1800s. They're all identical, they're all the same. They're all certified.
Where do we go from here? Well, I'm wondering all sorts of things. I bet you've got questions as well. Are there other copies of the covenant still to be found, and that will authenticate some of the ones that have already been discovered? What needs to be done? including people like us, to convince the world of the authentic nature of the covenant of the prophet with Christians. Is this engaging Muslim scholars at the moment or not? Is there something here to unite Muslim and Christian communities? Or is there some challenge to all this, to its authenticity? And perhaps someone can tell us, maybe you can tell us, Professor, there is quite a challenge to that monastery at the moment, I believe. There is I read of an Egyptian general, is it, who actually wants to destroy the monastery. Is there something we should be doing about that? All sorts of things are emerging at the moment. But I'd be very interested, if you would like to either question the Professor, with what you've heard, and over to you.
This monastery has been surrounded by Muslims for 1400 years. The local Muslims, the Jabaliya Arabs from the Sinai Peninsula, have always lived in peace and harmony with that tiny Christian community because it has been protected by the Prophet, and they have honored that. And unfortunately, they were forced for the first time in over 1400 years to close the monastery. Now, this is a site that used to receive 30,000 pilgrims per day. Okay, people from all over the world. And this flow has been constant since ancient times, right? Christian pilgrims, Muslim pilgrims, right? I mean, some go there for religious reasons, some go for just historical reasons, some people go there for tourism. But they had to close the monastery due to the dangers on the ground, due to the security situation, due to the spread of terrorists in the region who were attacking, robbing, assaulting, and trying to kill people on their way to the monastery. And also, there is a retired Egyptian general by the name of Atiyah, who has launched 72 lawsuits against these monks. And they have to respond to every single lawsuit in the court of law. He is demanding that the Egyptian government raise this monastery to the ground. In so doing, he would destroy the covenant of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians. What can you do? There's a journalist who's based in Ireland. His name is Craig Considine, who started a petition. What's the name of the website where you do all those petitions? It's change.org. So just Google it and go there, and the least you could do is sign it. Okay? What else could you do? Well, send letters to the Egyptian government. If that doesn't appeal to you, send a letter to, your political representatives. Urge your government to pressure the Egyptian government, all right? And demand that they protect this site, which is holy to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, all right? And I was at a meeting today at Oxford, Oxford, where we were discussing what we can do in order to protect churches, monasteries, mosques, right, cemeteries, sacred and holy sites, because they are under attack in many parts of the world. Any other questions, concerns, comments?
We have to change ourselves first.
As Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He will not change the condition of a people unless they change what is within themselves.
Otherwise, how can we protect all these thoughts? Everybody is individual. To see the kind of person, whoever we believe that we are working and expressing that Quran and Sunnah. Unity, not for humanity. While I was a young girl, we lived in Bangladesh,
Yes.
So Hindus and Muslims.
by saying how much I appreciated your presentation. It was completely new to me, this, although I'd had a look on the internet before I came just to get a little bit of background. It's quite a revelation to see that what you discovered and the message and the challenge it throws out. While I was on the internet, I did notice that you did an interview with the gentleman you just mentioned who's drawing up a petition, Craig Convertime.
Yes, he's
Something like that?
with me, yes.
Where when you're talking about the covenant, you actually, not the exact words, but I have them here, but to paraphrase, that you make the point that one religion should not be the enemy of another religion, and I can see that, and I think everybody can agree with that. And then you go on to say that probably the enemies are, or certainly the challenges, or the enemies really, are secularism and atheism. And it made me think, because I think that, tempting though it is, to say something like that, and see the world in those terms, I think it's actually a grave mistake to actually put forward the view that the enemies are people who believe in secularism or atheism, because I don't think those are mutually exclusive groups of people, believers and unbelievers. And if I could just quote, you'd be aware, I'm sure, of his work, that Charles Taylor wrote a very big book about secularism called A Secular Age. And he says, it is possible to see modern humanism as the enemy of atheism. But since the conclusion in neither case is warranted, the question arises why so many people do so. I'll give another quote, this time from Ronald Dworkin, the late professor of philosophy and law. Gods have served many purposes. They have promised an afterlife, they've explained storms, and they've taken sides against enemies. But a central part of their appeal has been their supposed achievement of filling the world with value and purpose. The conviction that a God underwrites value, however, as I will argue, presupposes a prior commitment to the independent reality of that value. That commitment is available to non-believers as well. So theists share a commitment with some atheists that is more fundamental than what divides them, and that should facilitate and furnish a basis for a communication between them. So my point is, and my comment, I guess, is that the enemies, in my view, to the religions are not atheism or secularism. I think the enemies of all religions and of people who have values at the centre, the enemies should be intolerance, injustice, inequality, corruption, poverty. Those are the real enemies, not atheists or secularists who may share exactly the same values as you hold very dear. So it is a comment. I'd like to hear what you think of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, when we speak of good and positive, it could also be a diabolical, destructive force. Okay? So we have to contextualize a bit those comments. From 1517, more or less, all the way to 1888, a large part of the Muslim world was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. Yes? So, these were religious people. And they renewed these covenants of protection for Christians on a yearly basis. If it wasn't every year, it was every second year. They would gather all the religious scholars from all the different schools of thought, and they would renew this covenant of protection. When were these covenants broken? Well, believe it or not, it's when the Ottoman Empire collapses and becomes a secular state. The Young Turks, okay, were secularists, right? With a focus on the West and everything. They had rejected the caliphate and traditional Islam and so on. They are the ones who massacred the Assyrian Christians. The Young Turks, right? Modern secular Turkey are the ones that committed the Armenian genocide, not traditional Muslims. Interestingly, the first thing they did before committing these atrocities, they went to the churches. There were covenants in parts of like northern Iraq. Anyhow, borders fluctuate, but it's like northern Iraq, southeastern Turkey. They went to these churches that had these covenants, destroyed the covenants. You know, there was some symbolic, diabolical reason for doing it. And then they massacred the Christians. So when I made that comment about secularism being the enemy, I was talking about that specific context. Now, in Britain here, in Canada, in the US, we have very tolerant societies. Yes? Can we agree? Yes? No? More or less.
Pretty much.
Okay. Well, so there are problems in everything, and I've been talking to policymakers and diplomats and everything about it. Okay, it's working pretty good. I wouldn't say secularism works well in France. And I told that to the French when I went there. You are secular, and that means that you ban the hijab. Okay? You want to ban halal food. And when Muslims ask permission to build a mosque, it is almost always denied. In the name of secularism. So to me, I'm down with that, you know what I'm saying? So again, secularism can take different forms and different shapes, and sometimes it is the enemy. But of course I'm a scholar, and the things are not black and white, and there's all kinds of shades of gray. But it all depends on the case. Yes. And you mentioned this thing of secularism. Let me explain to you something about the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and the type of society that he created. And this may be illuminating to most people here. You hear all this nonsense about Dawlat al-Islam, the Islamic State. Interesting. Strange, that word is not found in the Quran, it's not found in the Sunnah. There's no such thing as Sulta, there's no such thing as Hakimiyya, and give me a break with this nonsense of Jumhuriyya, a republic. Do you think that's in the Quran? It's not there. The Prophet used one word and one word alone to describe his socio-political economic system. Ummah, motherland, nation, homeland. He wrote a constitution. Most Muslims have never read it. He goes to Medina, first thing he does, establishes a constitution called the Ummah document, in which all citizens were equal, regardless of religion. He says the Jews are equal to the Muslims are equal to the Jews. This was a feudal society. They were always at war. Identity was based on tribal affiliation. He got rid of all of that. Actually, he didn't impose this system on anyone. He was invited. They say, listen, we've been killing each other for generations, because I'm from this tribe, you're from that tribe, you're a Jew, you're a polytheist, you're a Christian. Can you please come and, bring order? So he comes with this system. He says, we will identify as members of this ummah. 20,000 people lived in Medina. 20,000. How many were Muslims? 200 to 300. 200 to 300? The Muslims were a minority at the beginning. Very interesting. Very interesting. Anyhow, so that is the system. And the system included Muslims, it included Christians, it included Jews. And when Islam started to spread throughout the world, they came across other communities. Buddhists, Hindus, right? Zoroastrians. And scholars sat down and said, how are we going to treat these people? And you know what the consensus was? We're going to treat them like everyone else. So these protections, these rights and liberties that we grant to Jews and Christians and Muslims, we're going to extend the protection to these other people. Throughout most of Islamic history, Muslims were the minority. They were the minority for centuries in Egypt. They were the minority for centuries in North Africa and Al-Andalus. They were the Ottoman Empire in large part was Christian. India, under the Mughals, majority Hindus. But it was a just system. It would never have worked. The minority would never have been able to oppress that huge majority, but if they deprived them rights. So they lived together, they coexisted. That's the model, okay? So these people running around talking about Islamic states, they're more like satanic states, okay? What they're trying to create in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere. All right. Well, some people, not all of them, there are many, many good Muslim scholars out there who have fulfilled their duties, who have taught the true and correct and traditional interpretation of Islam. Yes, I love them, they love me. But we've had lots of court clerics working for tyrants and oppressors, giving justification, right? They're on the payroll and there's all kinds of politics involved. And there's a hadith that says the ulama are the best of the people. And it continues, the ulama are the worst of the people. So, they could be very good, and they could be very bad. So, people like us are counting on people like you, ordinary people, grassroots, okay? Normal Muslims. We don't think this change is going to come from the top down. We think it's going to be bottom up, right? So, that is how I feel. Anything else?
Could I ask two polytheists on a
Yes.
number of occasions?
What,
Could you tell me the difference between a polytheist and a Christian?
poly means many. Theo means God. A polytheist is someone who believes in numerous deities. Okay? Christians believe in one God and one God alone. They are, hence, monotheistic. Yes, mono-one, theist God. So, I say what the Prophet says, that Christians are mu'mineen. That's how he described them in all these covenants, and that's how he described them in the Constitution of Medina. And anyone who says otherwise does not know the difference between the Quran and the phone book. Thank you. And I will leave it at that, because otherwise I'll say more incendiary things. All right? Thank you.
Jeremiah, and I'm from the Lancaster University, and just to frame this wonderful evening of engagement, this is part of our initiative which we called Christian-Muslim Encounters in Lancaster. What John has been trying to say, an encounter between different faith communities, and in this case, a very strong Christian community and a very strong Muslim community. The important thing is that the communities that are committed to encounter each other, in the process, being vulnerable, willing to change, and willing to learn, and willing to grow together. In this journey, I think one of the things that we have learned in the last few months of engagement is that many of the traditional modes of communication, many of the traditional modes of engagement and encounters has kind of gone dry. I think we needed to reinvent, we needed to relearn the language of engagement. And that's when we came across this wonderful person called John Morrow and his work. And by accident we heard about it. And we wanted to find out, to develop new languages. Very interestingly, we had to go back 15th, 16th centuries back to something that has been lost in the mayhem, in the cacophony of confusion that has been created in our kind of postmodern society, where what we call religion, secular, has become rather terms to refer to power relations. One who is powerful, one who has a gun has a power, in many ways. I think what this evening has provided is an opportunity to know, to learn, and to look back in order to move forward. And we are really grateful that many of you have chosen to be with us this evening. Particularly John, I think he has had, as Brother Abdur said, that he has been on the road, traveling from point to point, but at the same time challenging some occasionally complacent, lethargic, lazy minds, but challenging them, pushing them. We need to wake up. Otherwise, this society is going to be consumed by those few loud voices. In this process, we need some sane, grounded, passionate voices to stall these kind of confusions. So thank you, John, for giving us the tools. I think we can all very much say that, wait a minute, that's not the message we've heard, and we need to go back to the roots and bring it back. And I also thank Bishop Geoff for kindly agreeing to be part of our conversation today as a leader of an important faith community in Lancashire. I think he has been encouraging and supporting our initiative. And I'm also very thankful to FASS for allowing us to use this space. And so it would have been very easy for us to host it in the university, where all the intellectuals would have been very happy to engage with John. But we wanted people who are encountering these realities in their day-to-day lives, and they needed to be provided with these tools. So thank you for all of us. Just to kind of alert you, if you look around, John has very kindly provided an enlarged prints of very important and valuable documents. So take a moment, walk around and see for yourself. And also, there are books, the book Covenants of the Prophet with the Christians of the World for out there, and it's carry on. To know, to learn more, please pick up a copy. And I'm sure, we have also provided the link to the website for the book. So do plug in and do more research. And finally, most of all, I think at the last minute, and of course we were working with a very shoestring budget. We thank Brother Abdur for allowing us to host this event, and he was able to bring John from Oxford, drive all the way, and also to plan his flight back to Canada. So thank you so much for Radical Middle Way and to Abdur Rahman for allowing us. So thank you so much, and to Ali for holding all this program together. And we will continue to look out for Christian-Muslim encounters in Lancashire, and we will continue this work in the days to come. So thank you so much. Please be upon him.